All of the manuscripts that we have of the New Testament all go back to some common edition made by the same editor sometime in the middle of the 2nd century. It makes sense to go to these different communities, say, we're going to take Mark, we're going to take Matthew, then we'll have both those communities will be on our side against Marcion. And then all the contradictions that result, we can gloss that all over with apologetics. Don't worry about it. We'll make it work. Oh, empty tomb? Oh, I can explain an empty tomb. That's easy. They stole the body, right? And so Matthew comes up with this story with the guards and the whole thing, saying, no, that was a lie spread by the Jews.
Dr. Richard Carrier, Diogenes of Ephrata, has another question. Thank you for supporting, man. Who wrote Galatians? Who wrote the Bible? The cynic in me agrees with an unknown wit who said, it's just a plain fact that there's no coherent core to Christianity. It's a religion built upon confusion and misconceptions across a collection of forgeries that were largely written in direct contradiction to one another. So whereas Judaism has a consistent ideological and philosophical spine to it and operates within a functioning framework, Christianity is just a random nonsense. It's just literally random nonsense, and you think about all these theologians who have dedicated their lives to trying to make sense of this mess. You may as well study ink blots to try and comprehend the meaning of the universe. Christian scripture is like a collection of random pages from diaries found in an insane asylum.
It's a bit extreme. Yeah, I don't quite share the exact same perspective on that. Christianity has become a mess because all of the things that have accumulated over time create problems. I mean, when you look at the Nicene Creed, it's a classic example of where you had all these competing churches with all these competing creeds. All those creeds made sense, but they had to create a political solution where they could include the churches they wanted to include and exclude the churches they wanted to exclude. So they stitched together this committee-decided creed. They're not really paying attention to whether it makes any sense, but they're trying to pull in all these other creeds and assemble their own Frankenstein creed to gerrymander their way to make the division the way they want it to go. The end result then becomes a shibboleth, where you just have to assert this to confirm that you are actually on the inside. You're an insider. If you're outgrouper, then you're the person who would say that. If you say this is contradictory, these things don't go together. Outsider, right? So like it's the way of like proving your political allegiance, that you will swear allegiance to this completely nonsensical creed. But so that's an example of why that's a mess. The Nicene Creed is a total mess for that reason. But that's late, right? That's later on. When you look earlier than that, and you have all these competing sects. Each one is internally coherent, right? It looks incoherent only when you try to insist that they're all the same sect, right? When you try to mash all their stuff together. And the earliest sign of this happening is when you see the formation of the New Testament. I'm actually very much in line with David Trobish, who did this book called The First Edition of the New Testament, where he looks at the manuscripts of the New Testament and looks at all the stuff that don't get put in the critical apparatuses, the printed editions. He looks at the actual letters per line and the punctuation marks and abbreviations that are used and all of this stuff, and shows that all of the manuscripts that we have of the New Testament all go back to some common edition made by the same editor sometime in the middle of the 2nd century. And so that if there were earlier versions, which probably were earlier versions of most of the texts that are in there, we have no surviving copies of those. We only have the version, the edit of this one particular person or committee.
Is it fair to say even in Islam, like what happened when they burnt all these manuscripts there were alternative Quran manuscripts, and they were like, let's stick with this?
That's an interesting aside, because we have that new Quran that just was found, the palimpsest, right? That we found a text of the Quran that almost goes back to when the Quran was written. It's very close, within 100 years. In fact, the margin of error overlaps the date of the beginning of the Quran. But it was scraped off, and the new Quran was written over it. And the new Quran corresponds much more closely to the Quran that goes around now as the Quran. But you go look at the one that was scraped off, that's the earlier version of the text. There's a lot of variant readings. Like it does not agree in every particular with the one today. So that's an example of what we're talking about there.
Right.
But unfortunately, I've lost my train of thought because you took
Sorry,
me off of
but you were going into why all of these things trace back to a mid-2nd century.
Why is all this stuff in the Bible, right? So you have Mark and Matthew are arguing against each other, right? So Mark is a pro-Pauline, pro-Gentile look, we don't need to be Torah observant necessarily. We just need to follow this particular prescriptions of Jesus. It's very much a gospel aimed at promoting the Gentile Christian market. And Matthew comes along and they don't like this, so they rewrite it and I think sell it as the original, right? I think they're trying to push this as Mark is the bastardization. This is the original one. In the original one, Jesus is totally pro-Torah observance, right? It's all pro-Jewish Christianity. Not one jot or tittle of the law will go away until the end times, right? So like, no, you have to still be kosher. You still have to follow all of the laws and stuff. And and there's a lot of aspects of this where Matthew is definitely pushing Jewish Christianity against Mark's more laissez-faire attitude about whether you have to be a Jew or not. These were clearly gospels at odds with each other, like they're arguing against each other. And so they're originally in different communities, right? That were sects that were not friends, basically. So whoever decided to put them together, now when they did that, it created all the contradictions that you find between Matthew and Mark. Like, why would you do that? Why would you promote that? And of course, the New Testament that we have is a response to the original, quote-unquote, New Testament, which would be Marcion's collection. So this heretic, well, what Orthodox Christians would call a heretic, Marcion had put together his own edition. We don't have that today. We have quotations and descriptions, but we don't have the actual original. And so this is the response to that. It's the anti-Marcionite. So they want to marshal all the churches they can politically against the ones that are siding with Marcion. So if you want to increase the number of churches that are on your side, but not increase it so much that you start compromising fundamental beliefs that you are disagreeing with them on, it makes sense to go to these different communities. Say, we're going to take Mark, we're going to take Matthew, then we'll have both those communities will be on our side against Marcion. And then all the contradictions that result, we can gloss that all over with apologetics. Don't worry about it. We'll make it work. So I think the decision as to which gospels to include, and you can point this out too, like Luke is arguing with Matthew in many ways. John is definitely arguing with Luke. John does not like Luke. And so these different communities, they get stuffed in there for political reasons. The reasons they're being sold as the canonical four. And then by the time you get to Irenaeus is claiming, and it's like divine law that there should be the four gospels, and because of the lion and these other symbols and the four winds, and he's coming with all these ridiculous reasons why those gospels have to be in there. None of those reasons are the actual reason that they were selected. I'm sure it was political. It had something to do with the war in the church, control for the church. How do you get more communities on your side? You have to go pick their gospels, etc. So I think that's what's going on there. And so you get the mess that he's talking about, like all these contradictions in the New Testament. Why? It's because of this political decision. It's just like the Nicene Creed, where they take all these contradictory creeds, smash them together, and try to sell that as the coherent new creed, right? So I think that's what's going on. It's the mess is created more by the politics of the church than by the actual religions themselves. If you look at each gospel on its own, it's internally coherent. Like they're making their own internal coherent argument for their own particular point of view. It's not a mess in the way that it becomes a mess when you put all four of them together and say all of these are sacredly endorsed by God. And then, now we have all these problems that result when you start claiming that. So I think that's what's going on there when he talks about the mess that is Christianity.
Yeah, I think there's a point in which we can go too far, though, like you said, and just start. It's all a bunch of dots.
Yeah, well, right. Dismiss it all as lunacy, but then you miss like the beautiful stuff of how they're telling these stories. I mean, the example of Matthew with the way he uses Daniel. So the Magi, for example, in the Nativity story, that's an allusion to Daniel. There's a lot of like intertextual references to Daniel and the way it's constructing it. But it's even more clearly with the empty tomb story, where it's definitely Daniel in the lion's den. There's so many parallels, and it's basically just a retelling of that story, but about Jesus in the empty tomb, right? So it's like a different context, but a different purpose. But he's using the material. So someone who knew Daniel in the lion's den, especially if they knew it in the Greek, would definitely get like the allusions. This is Daniel that we're talking about. So now I can interpret this text based on my understanding of Daniel, the message of Daniel. I can understand what Matthew's trying to tell me with his version of it. And so that's kind of like the sub-message, the subtextual messages amongst each other. Now, I think Matthew probably assumed that some people wouldn't get that. And so it's only the people who really get it. They're the higher-ranking insiders. They're the ones he's going to be most pleased by, is the ones who actually get the point. But I also think he's doing this literally, because it's also used literally as an apologetic for the people who go around, hear the empty tomb story in Mark, and then go around claiming, they just stole the body, right? And so they don't know this. They don't have witnesses or anything like that. They don't have anybody who was there. No, it's just an obvious rebuttal, right? It's like, oh, empty tomb? Oh, I can explain an empty tomb. That's easy. They stole the body, right? And so Matthew comes up with this story with the guards and the whole thing saying, no, that was a lie spread by the Jews. Or spread to the Jewish elite, to be specific. Matthew's not the one attacking the Jews generally. That's a later redaction of John that starts doing that. But he does say the Jewish elite did this to try and suppress it. And so that only works if it's taken literally, right? So I see both layers going on in Matthew here. They're both the sort of the symbolic meaning of what's going on in the text that he wants you to get through the intertextuality and the messaging of the symbols and so on. And then there's also, he wants the literalist to get it as literal and be able to use it as a literal apologetic against the anti-empty tomb rhetoric. So I think both is going on in Matthew in this particular case. And if you think like, well, isn't that a contradiction? It's not, because they understood that there were these two groups, the two markets they had to reach. And we have Origen, the scholar in the 3rd century, occasionally it has moments of remarkable candor when he just outright admits this. Like there's several moments that if you go digging through the works of Origen, every once in a while, he'll just admit this and say, yeah, there's some people who need to take it literally, and that's most of the uneducated folks, most of the rank and file. But there's some people who will take it symbolically. And so there's two different groups, and we need to hit them both. And then there's another point, like a separate point, where he makes the point that we can't rely on the masses of the believers to be the insiders who get the allegory, because they're not educated enough, they're not smart enough, they can't handle it. And if we try to teach them that, if we try to say like, no, this is all symbolical stuff, there's deeper meaning, you're not supposed to take it literally, they won't believe. It'll take too long for them to learn all the things they have to learn to actually get it and thus convert. And they'll die in their sins and they'll be damned, right? So Origen actually outright says, no, we have to sell them the literal story to get them saved now. It's totally fine, because once they die and go to heaven, we can sort it all out then. We'll have endless time to like teach them then. So he's just outright admitting the program here, that we have two markets we're trying to hit. And there is some fibbing going on. We're trying to sell it as literal while we're also in the back saying it's not literal. So they're doing both at the same time, and it's actually, again, this is politics of the church. But it's politics within the salvation logic, right? It's like, we need to save these people, they're going to be doomed. So obviously it makes sense that we can like sell them on a minor fib for now to like save them. That's totally fine, because we're saving lives. It's for a righteous cause, and we'll fix it later. It's totally fine. Once they're in heaven, they'll have endless time to like really understand what the Gospels are really about, for example. So we have that like admission from him. So it's not just that this is a theory of mine. Like they knew this, right? They were aware that this was going on. And so again, that speaks to all these confusions, because there's two levels of logic being sold at the same time for a specific political salvific reason.
Ladies and gentlemen, join MythVision's Patreon not only to support us, but there are 72 videos that I did with Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald and Richard Carrier, all on the Patreon, early access. You guys can ask personal questions when I go to interview these scholars, and you're helping MythVision grow.